Hi, happy Thursday. I'm going to be doing this on Thursday now. Woo! And by this, I mean posting a video of just kind of an off the cuff kind of thing. And I asked for questions, and I actually got a question, which is really, it just makes me feel special. So let me just read it for you, because then you'll have context for my answer. Neuronaut says it was interesting listening to your experiences with bipolar 1 being somebody with the second type. And by the way, just an aside, for those who don't know, bipolar 1 is more characterized by mania, where bipolar 2 is more characterized by depression. And I believe people with bipolar 2 don't really get into the really crazy levels of mania, and they don't tend to become psychotic. They have more the experiences of a lot of depression and then sometimes some hypomania. That's my understanding anyway. Correct me if I'm wrong. So anyway, hearing about how hypomania makes you feel uncomfortable due to the chance of entering full mania is totally foreign, because minus some feelings of paranoia and some snappiness, my symptoms when I reach that point are overwhelmingly positive. And I think that's what I've heard from a lot of bipolar 2 people. Can you speak more about when you got to the point that sense of energy switched from being positive to moderately concerning? Also, you mentioned you're in a hypomanic state the majority of the time. How low have your depressions been? And have they always occurred in the aftermath of a manic episode? And then they compliment me. I'm not going to read that because that would just be self-indulgent. But thank you. That's really nice to hear. Okay, so well, let me attack the first question. So, it's more like, speak more about when I got to that point where it became concerning. So, there are two ways I could answer this, and I'm just going to do both for the sake of clarity. So when the first time that mania became unpleasant for me was sort of at the more or less in the middle of my first psychotic / manic episode. I'm not sure exactly when technically that became psychosis. I mean, it was a very fluid transition, and I'm not really convinced that there is a sort of perfect, rigid boundary between the two. But anyway, it was when I remember when they brought me to a hospital for the first time, and I was still at a point of being really just elated. And I know I had all kinds of changing ideas about, who I was and what was going on, but it was always like it was some sort of miracle that was happening. Either like I was dead and, going through a journey to the afterlife, or maybe I was God or some kind of angel or some kind of prophet or some special person. Like it was very like that. And everything seemed miraculous. Everything seemed beautiful. I thought that I was at the hospital to help people. I thought that, I had been brought there to like share this miracle that was going on with me. And it wasn't until they transferred me to a second hospital, because they didn't have any space for me at the mental ward. So I had to be transferred to this very disturbing mental hospital that I talked about. the transfer itself was traumatic, and then being at this other hospital was really, really traumatic and scary. And that's kind of when it went from, you know, this very grandiose, enjoyable kind of place to paranoia, where I thought that everybody was an alien. They were going to get me. you know. So, yeah, I mean, through the rest of that episode, I guess it kind of went in between like intense paranoia and intense, I don't know. I don't know that I was really that afraid, because I felt like I was really powerful and I felt like I was going to beat the aliens, but but it wasn't cool. Like it was unpleasant. But I didn't have a sense that there was something wrong with me, which is why I was still refusing to take the medication. I thought the medication, like a lot of people do when they're in a space like this, I thought that the medication was like a conspiracy to poison me or something, whatever. So yeah, so I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're asking. So my other answer to that would be after I came down from that psychosis, and I like had been on antipsychotics for a while and finally really came to the I don't want to say full, because I mean it took me years to process this, but to an almost full realization of what had happened and how delusional I'd been and the things that I did. Like, it's like the things that you do when you're in a state like that, they make sense in the context of what you believe is going on. but not only do they not make sense in the context of reality, but then you realize that you've humiliated yourself, you realize that you've hurt people or scared people. I mean, you realize that you've damaged relationships, that you've maybe lost relationships. Those were the things that, at least for me, were really painful. And just honestly, maybe the scariest thing was just realizing how wrong I was. I mean, I know that might sound weird, because it's not our culture is so focused on tangibles. This is not a tangible. It's just the idea of being wrong, the idea of being, crazy, the idea of being deeply delusional, and that your understanding of what's going on is that wrong. It's a very scary feeling. And I do want to make the distinction, because I'm going to make a video about this at some point, because a lot of people think that it's like the way it's portrayed, for instance, I mean, in a lot of movies, but what I'm thinking of is A Beautiful Mind, where it's like, he actually dreams up these photorealistic people and like this whole scenario that he believes is happening and that he's hallucinating. Like, that's not even the real story of John What's-His-Face. And I know a little bit about his story, even though I can't remember his name, because he's a mathematician and I'm, into math. So his work is really cool and his story is really cool. But his actual story, like, he didn't even have visual hallucinations. They just did that for the movie. But I did have some visual hallucinations in Psychosis, and a few of the things that I know were hallucinations in retrospect were fairly realistic, but they were still symbolic in a way that is not really like the way real life is. And definitely now, I mean, I don't have I'm not plagued by constant. I mean, I almost never have visual hallucinations. That was like really only at the height of my psychosis when I wasn't sleeping. But I do still sometimes have a lot of intrusive thoughts, and I have sometimes like weird stuff like olfactory hallucinations, which is really wild, which is where you hallucinate a smell. But most people who have hallucinations can tell they're hallucinations. Once you're, I mean, even when you're in a state where you can't tell and you think they're real, they're still different from regular reality. Like, if that makes any sense, like they don't seamlessly blend into reality. Anyway, my point is that nonetheless, it was kind of more the intellectual side of it, like that I had all of these. I was so sure about all of these things that I thought were true that were not true, that were very, very not true. um, and I think realizing that I was capable of going to a space where I could be that wrong about that much and really, really believe it, like really be totally sure that it was true when it wasn't true. Um, I mean, that's scary. That's, I think, something that, I mean, I know I was scared of before that happened. And a lot of people are scared of. That's one of the reasons that doing hallucinogenic drugs can be really scary, because you feel super different. Your mind starts going in these patterns that are strange, and then suddenly you're like, what if I'm going crazy and I never come back? And that's what brings people into a bad trip a lot of the time, right? Except that this isn't just a trip. They're not, you can't just tell yourself, oh, it's just drugs, it'll end, because it might not. It might not. Like, you might wind up committed. There are people who are essentially permanently psychotic, and to some extent, any psychosis does have an effect on how your brain functions. I don't know about permanently necessarily, but I think they certainly can be permanent changes. And that's one reason that every time you do it, it harms you in a somewhat irreparable way, I think. So I think that was really the main reason that I didn't want to go back there. I didn't want to go back to that place. That was just so scary, because I didn't want to be insane. I wanted to. I mean, we're all wrong about things, and we're all delusional to some extent. That's also something that I've realized um, since recovering from psychosis. I've recognized the extent to which mass delusion is a pretty common thing, and individuals delude themselves and just are deluded. I mean, it's, to some extent, it's hard to get around, and you can't, all of your ways of understanding the world can't be right. I mean, not realistically, we're human. It's going to be flawed. But the idea of going to a space where it's that flawed, where you're overwhelmingly, your sense of what's true is completely wrong. So that made it so that anytime I start to get a feeling that reminds me of mania, even, it's uncomfortable. I mean, yeah, it's uncomfortable. And when I really would start getting into hypomanic spaces and strongly hypomanic spaces, and similarly, I don't think there's a rigid boundary between hypomania and mania that kind of flows into one another. I mean, yeah, it went from being uncomfortable to downright scary, because I couldn't make it stop. And even now, and I have so many more resources at my disposal, I also have a lot more to lose, because now I have a family. So, yeah, it's still something that concerns me. And it also it's kind of, I guess, just sort of emotionally triggering, because it just kind of, like, for instance, when people compliment me in a certain way, I mean, and people think when I react that that's like I have low self-esteem or something. And that's not it. I've never struggled from low self-esteem. Or I don't want to say never, like in middle school when everyone did, but that's not really my problem in life. But when people compliment me in a certain way, like they make these kind of statements like, oh, like you're so smart. You're very extraordinary. You're so talented. You're so, like, when people, it's statements where they set me apart from other people and kind of are saying like, you're special or you're better or something like that. Like, I don't want to say that part of me doesn't enjoy it, but it also makes me really uncomfortable because I don't want to think of myself that way. I'm fine with people appreciating, like I said, I appreciate this compliment that Neuronaut gave me because it was basically saying that like I'm doing a good job with this work that I'm doing on this channel. And that's great feedback. I love to hear that. But like it's the kind of thing, the kind of weird, like something that could make me feel in a more grandiose way about myself. That's the kind of thing that it starts, because it just even reminds me of that feeling of being manic. And so I have to kind of be like, no, I'm not. So I don't want to be, yeah, I don't want to set myself apart like that. I don't want to feel grandiose about myself. I want to feel good about that I'm doing things that are helpful, doing things that, you know, when I'm making these videos, I want to feel like somebody enjoys them. And I want to feel like they're substantive, you know. But yeah, I hope that distinction is clear. Because it's really something it's something that comes up for sure. But you said something about me being manic most of the time, and that was true during the period of time I was talking about, when I was unmedicated. Now, because I'm on a decent dose of medication, I almost never even feel slightly hypomanic. I just feel normal. Like I feel in the middle, which I love. It's my favorite. There's some aspects of hypomania I miss. Excuse me. Especially since I have like some chronic physical problems, so I miss the energy because I have fatigue a lot, and my brain being faster, because hypomania kind of, you can think faster, and I do sometimes miss that, but it's just so not worth it to me. So yeah, I'm happy about that. Okay, so then there was the question about how low have your depressions been, is the first part. So how low? I mean, some of them have been, it's certainly not hard for me to get into a space where I'm having, you know, suicidal ideations and suicidal intrusive thoughts. Those are kind of like almost like boring at this point. I've definitely been in depressions that were bad enough that I struggled to do anything really other than lay in bed. But that hasn't been for the most part. Like really that the worst depression was right after that first psychosis. And because that psychosis, like that was like months that I was manic and psychotic. Months. Before I really got good treatment. So that was a really hard crash. And I do think the other part of the question was, have the depressions always occurred in the aftermath of a manic episode? And I never kept like a good diary or anything, so I'm not 100% on this, but I think almost always, if not always, yeah. With the exception of, you know, when I had my daughter, I had a lot of postpartum depression. And I think, I'm not sure how much of that really had to do with being bipolar. I, I definitely think a lot of it was me reacting to the hormones because I was on birth control and I was breastfeeding, and that's kind of like a hormonal roller coaster. But being bipolar might have had something to do with that. That was unpleasant. It definitely, yeah, that was unpleasant. That was, I was definitely dealing with a lot of intense, intrusive thoughts, was more what characterized that. I wasn't like, I wasn't in bed, unable to move, that kind of thing. But I did have a lot of like self-loathing and those kind of feelings like, oh, people would be better off without you, that kind of thing. Um, for sure. And that was like, those would come in patches for like over a year after giving birth until I finally got that IUD out. It was hormonal. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I don't. There was a number of variables going on with that. That's not my typical thing, though. That's not what would normally happen. If I got off of medication right now, if I stopped taking lithium, and I have stopped taking lithium a few times since I've been on a full dose. For instance, when I got pregnant, I'm not going to go into that. That's another video. But, I've been off for periods of like 6 to 8 months where I wasn't taking lithium. And after, like, it would take months and months and months and months. And then eventually I'd start getting kind of hypomanic regularly again. But it takes a long time, actually. There's like kind of a delayed effect of the lithium. I think my understanding of it is it kind of changes somewhat the way that your brain works. And like the more time in your life you spend being manic, the more the sort of mania patterns are kind of set in your brain, and lithium can help kind of reset your brain, is my understanding of like neural pathways or something. I'm not a neuroscience person. So what's my point? Yeah, but anyway, yeah, hypomania is my baseline. Like I said, if I stop taking medication, that's what would happen. I find it doubtful that I would get depressed. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question. And I really appreciate you reaching out. Feel free to comment back with any other thoughts or feedback, and I'll get back to you. And for the rest of you, thanks for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe, because like I said, I'm going to do this every Thursday, and I'm also going to do more polished videos too as I have time. So thanks. Bye.